Hey, welcome to the Minds Panel Show, and we have the Decentralized the Internet panel, and we have Tech Lords here. What's up, Tech Lords?
Everything's fine. I hope you guys are doing okay too.
Yeah, did you get your coffee?
Yes, I did.
Nice. Tech Lords is all ready now. Then we have Gus Spiders. What's up, Gus Spiders?
How's it going, everybody?
Doing good. And we have special guest Bill. What's up, Bill? Good to have you back on.
Hey, thanks.
Cool. So today's topic is decentralizing the internet, and so there was this web summit that happened uh, June 8th through June 9th, and it was all about can we decentralize the internet as far as the structure of it, and the reasons for this, and it's just like anything else. The way it's structured right now is that it runs through a lot of servers that are centralized, and and even the protocol itself for the HTTP is if something gets broken within the link chain, then you could lose access to different information. So they want to make it secure, safe, and permanent, and censor-free. And these are all issues dealing with decentralizing the internet. And so we're gonna open up the discussion with hey, we got a special guest now too. What's up, Ian?
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good, man.
Good to have you on.
Yeah, good to be here.
Cool. And so I think we're gonna start off with Gus Spiders and MadeSafe. So I guess basically tell everybody what MadeSafe is and why is it important to kind of see what they're doing.
So MadeSafe, when I was first introduced to it, was I only saw it in the simplest form of a data storage solution because it's decentralized data storage that is encrypted and fragmented over the current infrastructure of the internet to create an encrypted decentralized storage solution for basically anyone in the world. But then once you get into decentralized hosting for web hosting, the web pages actually replicate themselves between users that are hosting on the safe network. And so the more popular a page is, the faster it actually loads, the better access you have to it. So it creates a new model for going viral, I guess, because we deal a lot with virality. And so websites can now actually go viral. And it's not what we have today where Amazon and Netflix and all these special web domains are paying for better access for their users than other. It's definitely a problem as far as internet freedom. But also, there are reward mechanisms in MadeSafe so that you can actually farm on the network. And it's sort of like Bitcoin mining because it is a cryptocurrency, but it's not much of a currency. It's more proof of resource and reward within the network. So you can actually have your resources farming these coins when it's all up and running. Right now it's just in beta phases, and so it's a lot of fun to play with, but there aren't vaults in place yet to own and to farm for. But you essentially can farm and buy your storage, this decentralized storage on the internet, and so you get rewards for putting up your hardware as the incentive for being part of this huge decentralized internet. And there are actually a lot of APIs being built on it so that it's not only within the browser over a proxy, it's also utilizing applications on the side, which is another thing they talked about at the summit a little bit, was sort of the idea of having, maybe the Minds browser, the Minds website that you go to, but also within the API you can run applications on the side to have more advanced tools to do a lot more advanced features and maybe video editing, all kinds of things. There's already an app store on the MadeSafe network for downloading. There's torrenting software. There's I was playing around with something yesterday. It's called Ghost in the Safe, and what Ghost in the Safe is it's a content management system for MadeSafe that allows you to create blogs and blog posts that replicate themselves through access to your launcher onto services you run. So one of the things I've been running for a while is just a simple Mines gateway. It's just mines.govspiders.safenet. And so you can go there, and it just has like sort of a little bio piece about what I'm doing, and then it gives you a link to Mines, so that there's sort of a limited number of services up at the moment because it's in trial stages. So having that there as one of the available web pages sort of gives Mines a bit of notice within that community, and vice versa.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting point, and I kind of knew this, but they really emphasized this at the summit, where today's internet is kind of centralized, which is kind of concerning because a lot of the content that's up is actually routed entirely via centralized social networkings like Facebook and stuff like that. So not only do they control the flow of the content, but also too, if something like, for instance, when I think it's inevitable that something takes over Facebook, all of that content that they had could be lost if they they go under, like one person was using the example of GeoCities. GeoCities got bought by Yahoo, and then it wasn't making money for them, so then they kind of closed it down. And so all those websites prior to this were lost. All the links got broken, and so they equated it to book burning. So you lose this information that was there, and so what people are working towards is building a way to engineer that out of the problem. But I would like to get Bill's perspective of about how important it is to keep data and this whole concept.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I was excited when I found that summit. I'm hoping that next year we can get much more closely involved as we, release all the rest of the code this summer, and really are ready to start integrating with a bunch of these different decentralized frameworks. I think that there's lots of potential to play with a number of them. It doesn't, it's not going to be one framework to rule them all in regards to decentralized frameworks, because that is against the whole point. So hopefully, but at the same time, you do want standards to arise so that we don't have something that's overly decentralized. And I think that part of the reason, I like the word decentralized with the D in parentheses, because if you look at cool projects like Diaspora and a lot of other decentralized distributed social networks, they've really struggled to gain a community that has momentum. And I think that one of the ways that Minds has been really successful so far is sort of starting out maybe a little bit more centralized, like we're destined to be a decentralized project, but the fact that people are able to go to Minds.com and sign in and interact in a way that they're used to, because learning how to navigate Diaspora, for instance, looking up people, imagine someone who doesn't know anything about this, but who does care about privacy and internet freedom, going there and they see all these different pods, they don't know what's going on, there's not a ton of activity on any individual pod, and so it can be a little bit disillusioning. And so I think that there's a migration process that is really important for making decentralization successful. And part of that migration is working with centralized networks to migrate people and transform those centralized networks into decentralized networks. So, our stack is, Ubuntu, Nginx, PHP, Angular, but and a bunch of other stuff. But all of that can be harnessed and integrated with stuff like MadeSafe, ZeroNet, all, a bunch of the. It would be cool to have some conversations with the Acacia, and which is building social networks on Ethereum. It's going to take a lot of different attempts to find something that catches. So yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, I think it is important what you were saying about for the average person to have, even for say people that are into this, but to have like a frame of reference and to be able to kind of just basically understand what's going on. Because I know too, we say that the Minds Panel Show is a decentralized multimedia group, and even within our meetings, and we have, it's small, but everybody kind of like looks to me like, oh, like if I'm in charge, and I look at everybody else as like, no, you could do whatever you want. And then we have like, and I know I've been in meetings with Scenario, and there's like this, like, okay, where you're talking about being too decentralized, and just as far as having a focus to move towards. Could be a lot of problems. Actually, me and Gov Spiders were talking about this before. But actually, I kind of want to bring up the hosting of nodes on the site. I noticed recently there's been about hosting your own network.
Yeah, there's going to be some really amazing stuff coming out next week and in the next month. So we've got um, live group chat in a form coming out hopefully this week, where it's running on, so we're using sockets.io to run all of this, so all the notifications are live, the comments appear live, and it's fixed. It's actually not in the encrypted messenger yet. Hope we'll get there eventually, but in groups and in your regular newsfeed now, all the comments are coming in live, and it'll be fixed. So it actually is a group chat. It's a fixed object, so get that same feeling as like you're in a Slack chat room or whatever, like this chat that's on the side of this hangout here. It really has that interactivity, and all the notifications are coming live. So there's a little rectangular object that is going to appear every time you get a notification, and you can click on that and go directly to that notification. Before, we're also adding comment filters for every different type of notification. So that's going to be really awesome, because notifications are a little bit of a just huge bucket of stuff, right? Especially if you have a lot of them coming in. So that is going to be huge for just general interactivity on Minds. And then we're also going to be launching the beta of hosting for the Minds hosted stuff on our servers, and this is sort of so people will be able to launch their own subdomain, which will be a total replica of Minds that they can totally customize, and custom domain if you want. And so we're going to gear that up for the period of the next month or two, and as we finish the internationalization with language support, which is crucial for our growth. I mean, we need to get the translations going, as well as a really revamped referral system, so that there's incentivization and rewards for bringing people into the network, both for Minds.com and for referring people to launch social networks. And so that's really exciting, and so hopefully we'll get some of the bugs out, and then the self-hosted stuff will come out late this summer.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Actually, Tech Lords, you were pretty big on the subdomains. Do you want to add something to that, or what do you envision that could do for everybody to have the subdomains?
Well, the subdomains, I've been waiting for a long time, but I'm a patient man. I know it's going to come eventually, but it's going to create a whole bunch of subnetworks, and it's going to spread like wildfire. So the Minds way of life will just spread like crazy all over the world. Just wait and see how many people are are going to get into this. Of course, you need to have a little experience with you know a console and how to set up and everything, but it's gonna spread like crazy. Um, as far as decentralized network are concerned, uh, on the personal note, I have unlimited internet here. So, I could set up a server, but not everybody has unlimited internet. Some people are limited to 60 gigs, others to 40. It depends where you are, who your internet provider is. So that might cause a problem for some of the nodes. Um, so that's the only concern I have right now, and the speed, of course. Um, I have a here. I'm lucky. I have a 40 megabyte connection, so it's not too bad. It's pretty fast. But a lot of people are still on like 5 maximum, and most of the time they have 3 megabyte upload. I mean download, which is not very much. So it might cause problems in the stability of the network if certain nodes cannot provide sufficient speed. But that's just a personal opinion. I don't know. Maybe we could ask Ian what he thinks about this.
I was thinking when we search, when you're in the network looking for all the available networks, that maybe we could show the latency of each network, and then you could sort by the least latent.
Nice.
Good.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting because not uh, hosting your own social network is something that is going to be valuable for some people, and to be honest, for others, it's going to be overkill. You're not everyone, depending on what your goals are, and XYZ. Not everyone necessarily needs their own entire network. Many, I think, ultimately, what we've been seeing, that the future of the internet, everyone's website actually will be a social network, because if you could have the same CMS functionality like a WordPress or something like that, but it has a whole social engine behind it, why wouldn't you want all of that extra functionality on your network? So, but at the same time, there still may be people who that is too much for, and but I think with the zero net type conversation, what that would imply is that a channel would actually be hosted on your device, and that each device is what scales the network, as opposed to us having to add servers in a central source. Every new machine is actually what contributes to the power of it, which is really, really interesting. And there's also a torrent structure so that it's uncensorable. Like what you were saying about how, yeah, if something happened to Facebook, it's very reasonable, actually, that, well, there is somebody with a flick of a button could take down all Facebook. And then all that content, everyone's years and years of work and networking is just down the drain. So that's really just from a security risk for the future of the internet. It makes no sense to have everything stuck in these silos. But the silos they do have their place in the evolution of the internet. So it's not, I think some people get a little bit too extreme, like, oh, centralization is bad and decentralization is good. But it's really not as simple as that. Both will always be involved. Even in a decentralized world, you're still going to have centralized nodes within that greater centralized, decentralized environment. So, and in a lot of ways, you could still have people running servers which are just contributing more to the decentralized network.
That's a brilliant idea. I'm ready for it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that me and Ghost Spiders always talk about, or are really excited about, is that the what he was talking about with MadeSafe is the proof of resource, to where someone like Tech Lords, who has a little bit more unlimited internet and resources with his own server and his own computing power, could kind of in a sense use that resourcing power in a pool, so someone that's on a cell phone that doesn't have all those resources could kind of have this relationship with tech lords, and however that gets worked out in that way. And like MadeSafe, they have the safe coins with that. But because Spiders, your perceptions of what Bill's talking about and how that could propel minds forward, and the whole, because I think that's on the whole evolution of where everything is going, what I've seen on the internet.
Yeah, that's I haven't heard of that system in place with Minds yet. That idea for I think you called it zero net hosting for a channel. Um, it would be really cool, like you were just saying, to incentivize it somehow, so that someone like Tex Lords, or I have pretty good internet speed too. I could probably host machines. I'm planning on farming MadeSafe coin, but I mean, I could host a number of accounts, and I would get rewarded somehow for that within the system, and that would be a cool way to decentralize it and break it up if we went that route. But I was actually going to go back to something Bill said really early on about how no single framework is really the answer. And when Tim Berners-Lee was asked to pick his top 3 decentralized projects, he refused, comparing it to the moon landing, saying that everyone is focusing on different functions. We've got some people working on fuel, there's others working on physics and navigation. You couldn't have made it to the moon without all of the pieces coming together. And whether it's Scenario, Minds, Decorum, these decentralized platforms can facilitate one another to grow. And so it's really going to be an incorporation, even if the correct one doesn't exist yet. Once that framework comes together and everything is properly practiced and tested, I mean, that's a whole other talk that someone was talking about. You don't have the right to point out flaws in software anymore on certain scales of privatized code, because it's illegal. You can't distribute exploits either, which, at the end of the day, we just came from the anarchy panel yesterday, but at the end of the day, kind of when you can pressure test everything, like we talk about working things at Minds, like we're open for anyone to come test things out. If it's broken, it's broken, and it needs to be fixed, sort of. Open source projects are more inviting for that pen testing, that improvement.
Yeah, and that's something too that maybe in our community, but I think too as we move along, that everything's kind of getting, especially with the new projects, it's about open source, decentralization way of working, and it's because that it has been like kind of tested that when you can't point out the flaws of the said project, and then those flaws get set, but it works a lot better. Like, you learn a lot when you're like, for instance, when we have our talks, right? Oh, and then you mention some point and I mention another point. Oh, I don't know about that, or I have you clarify a point, and we get to some kind of consensus, and we feed off each other, we build off each other. And I think this is just not a new way of doing things, but we're kind of really trying to get the grasp of this new era of human social evolution. I mean, it starts, with baby steps, and like when you first learning how to talk, you learn sounds, and then when you try to form language, you only learn simple words, and then you build it out, and then you can start like flowing, like and you can start going stream of consciousness and stuff. But there's building blocks that lead you up to that, and you still need those structures in a sense. You still need you're gonna need to look back on some of that stuff. But anybody else want to add to how everything is moving towards? If not,
Well, I
Yeah, I
think
think that there's a lot of infancy in a lot of these projects. And a lot of them are also moving pretty quickly. But generally, I haven't seen something in the social networking space that I think maybe there's a lot of work that's been going on in the back end um, for a bunch of the projects that contributed at the Decentralized Web Summit. But what I'm hoping is that all the work we've done on the front end of Minds is really going to be a huge contribution to that community, because we sort of are starting to gain a lot of momentum with how fast the front end is moving, and it's only going to keep going much faster. So, um, and I think that we're on a framework that is going to be pretty well absorbed by a lot of the community, because Angular 2 is definitely one of the most advanced tools out there for front-end design. And we're also, just so everyone knows, going to be doing a total overhaul of the mobile apps. We're probably going to be leaving Cordova, which is what we're using now, for it. It had its place. I think it's done a good job for sort of an initial app, but it's not capable of accessing native functions on the phones well enough. So we're going to be moving in the native direction, and that's really exciting. And there's a few different options for that. We don't necessarily have to go pure Android and iOS. There's a cool project called NativeScript, which actually allows you to have a unified framework and access all the native functions of the phone, but write it in CSS and JavaScript. So, and their NativeScript is already working directly with Angular 2. So there's a lot of energy there already. And, I think that once we get the code out there late this summer, then there's going to be a whole bunch of side projects that open up, like a much better Bitcoin integration, something with Ethereum, something with ZeroNet, something with MadeSafe. I mean, there's definitely no limit to what can happen. I'm just hoping that we can find developers in all of those communities who are interested in doing integrations, and I'm sure there will be. And I think that all of the projects can really help each other. There's a tendency to think competitively in the open source and decentralized world. There's still people who are sort of stuck in that, but I actually don't consider any open source and decentralized project a competitor at all. It's only collaboration in that space. It's only the proprietary networks and apps that we're competing against, because otherwise we're all on the same team.
yeah, I think that's really hit the nail on the head with that. Is that's the real kind of we were talking about on the anarchist panel, but we're moving from that's old way of thinking is like revolution, where you're like fighting against different people or whatever, but we're talking about evolution. This is the way things are moving towards, because it's making the old way obsolete, and this is a better way of doing stuff. And we were talking about rule of proof, and so this is where no longer kind of like rule by force or rule by coercion, but rule by proving that these systems work, or proving that your front end is better, or proving that the way you're running your stuff is better. But Tech Lords, I noticed that you wanted to jump in. Do you wanted to add something?
Well, what I wanted to say was already said, so I'm good. But
Okay, that's
me, I would be delighted to host my own Minds channel on my own server, but I'm not sure a lot of people are tech savvy enough to have a separate server, and to run their own channel. But it can be taught, but it takes a lot of work.
It has to be the only way that it's ever going to be successful in the long run is if you literally don't even know. Like a regular, there's just a reality that the vast majority of people on the internet will not learn how to run a server themselves. It has to be a click of a button, and it just does it on your phone. And that is going to take a lot of work to get a UX that is seamless on that level, and it protects all of your privacy and data, but simultaneously is as convenient as a Google Hangout, which is just going to take time and resources. So I think that patience is really important.
yeah, and I think that
We
is
have Lee with us tonight. Hello, Lee.
yeah. Lee came in.
Hi guys.
So what we were talking about right now is how to make, I guess, in this sense, all this stuff user friendly, right? So I mean that's another key to in talking about blockchain, or talking about MadeSafe, or talking about any of these centralized projects, is the communication part. Being able to be able to tell the story of it in a way that people can easily understand, but then also easily use. Um, so, I mean, this is something that actually is funny because Lee comes on that me and Lee with the Infinite Imaginarium are always talking about is the news story, and the news story of what we're getting towards. And I watched this one clip, and it's called the Pillars of Decentralized Society. And so the first part is decentralized communication, and which is kind of like what we're trying to do in the Minds community, where we're no longer being passive, right? We started off with common culture. Now we're developing the Minds panel show, and we're really trying to have these ideas brought to the forefront, that we're back and forth, but not only just having talks, but then we want to convert them into actually doing stuff. And this is what it's going to take to really be open source with Minds, is not that we have these conversations, but then where do we go from here, and how do we do that? Lee, maybe your thoughts on decentralization and communicating sometimes difficult subjects to the masses, because it's going to take the masses to have this evolution that we all talk about. Lee?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so this future of decentralization is pretty exciting. I was just going over the MadeSafe stuff and the new client that they're getting ready to. I think they've released it. I'm looking at getting the download and working with it. This future of being able to get this to the masses it's quite complicated, and frankly it's taken me a long time to wrap my head around it, and there's a lot of aspects I still don't understand, but I think that there's new things that are happening every day, especially what's happening with Ethereum and the DAO that they're working on. I think there are plans in sight to make this more user friendly But I'm not quite. I still haven't got my head wrapped around it quite yet.
Yeah, I was actually watching a how-to on voting for the DAO because I bought you voting tokens and I just wanted to try it out, but you have to get the Mint browser. Well, there's a few different ways you can. There's a few different clients, but you have to get this Mint browser, and it's not um, it's not fully accessible yet, but that's okay. I mean, it's moving in a great direction, and it's just part of the evolution. So uh, I think that the problem is though that in order for a mass migration to occur, it has to be like Google or Facebook in terms of its ease of use. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. So we are going to need to get more creative with crowdfunding and different ways of. I think the DAO was brilliant in how they've raised like 160 million in a couple weeks now. That's in ether. It's not liquid, but it is definitely an incredible experiment, and hopefully we can do some creative things like that with mines as well in the near future.
Yeah, the crowdfunding is pretty interesting, and they're taking it to a whole new level with that. But actually, I wanted to see what Ian's thoughts about communicating and the future and the social evolution. I think that's a good thing.
I think that with like VR is coming, and we're gonna be stepping into like we'll soon we are gonna be sitting in a room talking to each other, uh, fucking hosting the internet in chips in our brains. Um, what exactly what exactly about like decentralization were you wondering?
Just well, we were talking about decentralizing the internet, but I'm talking just like decentralizing as more of a philosophy, but as a way of how people are going to be working and thinking in groups or community together to kind of get away from said what our I see a lot of our problems is that it's with centralized authority and centralized systems, and they create these problems. But that we're moving towards this evolution of decentralization, in a sense that peer-to-peer artwork, peer-to-peer. Now we could do-it-yourself governance through the DAO. Now it's not easy, but it can be done. You could create your own bank with the blockchain. Now with MadeSafe and these other servers, you could do peer-to-peer web hosting, and what Bill's kind of talking about too. But so it's just this whole kind of decentralized. We're just using decentralized as the word to get it, but this is the way things are moving. And what you're saying is that pretty soon we're gonna be able not to only communicate with words, but I think Terence McKenna said something about this, is that the way communication is going to evolve to is that you're no longer going to what you're going to want to say is going to be beholden. Like you're going to actually be able to like transfer what's inside your head, and not to be fumbling around with words. But I could just send you what my mental picture is and be like, bam, this is what I think the future is going to be like. And then you're going to be like, oh, bam, this is what the future I think is going to be like.
Yeah, language was just one step of evolution on our way towards where we're going now, which is like I don't know if you would call it like psychic power, but the ability to translate thought energy, like these neural impulses, into text or into sound. And I mean, we're like, it's probably already happening. It just hasn't hit the mainstream yet, I would think.
They gotta make that user friendly.
Right. Just like a piece of plastic that you stick on the side of your head that then like looks like your skin. Then you can like pull it off whenever you want. For decentralizing, another thing I think is going to happen is that the economy is we're heading into a digital economy where literally you have a printer that can print your medicine as long as you have the information of what that medicine is. So people will have their servers set up, building concepts that can be translated directly to physical objects, and then they'll be able to basically trade that information for food or something, or for like we'll be able to trade information for food. So like currency now is just becoming electricity. When everyone, like the money currency is evolving into the electricity currency, where like if we all have solar panels and 3D printers, we don't really need anything else. But I think that the power of each individual to be their own producer of information is what we're doing by decentralizing.
Yeah, that's really exciting. That's one of those pillars of the decentralized society, is decentralizing production. And what you were talking about with the 3D printers, like you could even print, like, I mean, I don't think it's perfect yet, but biology, like there's where you could like 3D print a heart or something. I wouldn't trust it right now, but I mean, they're just showing a prototype of that. But anybody else want to kind of come into this whole decentralized production where we no longer need a middleman for that?
Yeah, definitely. Solar is hugely important. And renewable energy in general. I mean, that's another one of the big problems of huge data centers like AWS. AWS, Amazon Web Services, is an extremely powerful tool, and in a lot of ways, it does help communication, but it's also really not where the future is. So Minds definitely has the goal of running on 100% renewable energy. At some point in the future, when we can build our own data center, that would 100% be the goal, to be totally self-sustainable and independent.
Yeah, that's a big one, decentralizing infrastructure. And we were talking about this on the last Crypto Hustle show, and there was this article that was posted by Boussard, and it was saying that is Bitcoin unsustainable because of the amount of power it does to make a simple transaction possible for the proof of work is the equivalent to 1.75 American household. And so this is like, and imagine if that's scaling up. And then part of the problem too is what you were talking about, that you have centralized entities that produce electricity, and so that is something too that is really important, that I think even the guy that did the 4 pillars of decentralized society missed, about the infrastructure itself. And something me and Lee kind of talked about. Lee, do you want to jump in about that, about like maybe building, I know it's like what we were talking about, ecology of sustainability, I guess?
Well, yeah, exactly, and I think a lot of the ideas coming out of the Ethereum end of it, and this is one of the things that's drawing me away from Ethereum, and Dale kind of touched on some of this stuff, and it's the concept that we're going to continue to be exactly how we are, consuming everything in sight, and and not being sustainable with our actions and living with, because it's possible to build residential construction so that it actually yields energy, and all that energy gets tossed into industry, things like running or decentralized servers and so on and so forth, where actually every household is integrated with a computer that not only works with the internet and creates like a smart house, but the efficiencies that it is allowed to yield energy and then backfeed that to the network by computation power. And there's lots of things. That's why I really like MadeSafe and what's going on with those guys. It's not just this new tech and creating a decentralized autonomous organization, but it's more to do with the philosophy of where we're going and how we're going to be living, what we're going to be doing with the future. The future has got to change, and that much is for sure. And what direction we go into, the resources have to be able to be recyclable, and it's got to be like a tree. A tree uses everything It uses all the gas throughout its life and recycles oxygen and purifies the air. And then when it dies, the fuel that's burned, it's just a small fraction of what it's actually cleaned out of the environment. And that's what each unit has to be considered as, whether it's a DAO or a household or a giant factory. Everything's going to have to be built on that kind of concept.
Yeah. I think that's where the MadeSafe proof of resource, and we're talking about proof of like actual physical resource in that sense will be kind of interesting if we like could convert that to having, say, decentralized the infrastructure where your house is actually producing the energy, but it also feeds back into the network. So not only are you using computing power, but also your energy power. Cub Spiders, do you want to like go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I've got a few things. Sustainability with Bitcoin, and I used to have a deep obsession with Bitcoin early when I found it. I actually discovered Bitcoin when it was just above $7, and I had $100 as I was still in high school. I had $100, and I was planning on investing it in Bitcoin, and I didn't end up doing so. And that decision has haunted me for the rest of my life.
I know. Do you know how much it is right now?
Oh yeah, it's crazy. But so I kind of noticed there was a point in the growth when I was getting into Bitcoin mining, and then a little after that Litecoin mining, and I was sort of motivated that I could pursue that, and not very far, but I had a family friend's dad who had he was a pretty wealthy man. He had two giant rigs in his kitchen that were giant servers, all with every single slot filled with graphics cards that I had never even seen in the electronics stores. So it was somewhere above the market. I wasn't sure what they were, but I could just tell he was making a lot. He had a very large balance of Bitcoin that he had been mining, and so I wanted to try that. And I started looking through a lot of people's experiences, and you end up getting down to that energy cost versus your mining reward. And slowly there's a curve that it'll reward less and less is the problem. And so as it gets virality and more people are on that, sort of like I read something on the MadeSafe forums about how China has taken over the Bitcoin farming industry, and it's sort of this thing where it gets to the growth that's probably not that profitable anyway for that many machines to be doing that, and if less machines were mining, it would become more profitable, I assume, is how that runs. But then I was going to follow up something Lee said with a quote from Cory Doctorow of the EFF, and he says, if you computerize the world and you don't safeguard the users of computers from coercive control, history will not remember you as the heroes of progress, but as the blind handmaidens of future tyranny. And I really feel like, that's what I strive to be, and what a lot of us in our communities, and especially in decentralized technologies of all kinds, strive to be, is the heroes of internet freedom. And we don't want to bow down to let this land that we have, our 7 sovereign internet seas, to be taken down by these tyrannous warlords that govern us in all other ways. I was listening to the summit, and there are a lot of OGs, the kind of early on people that were involved in the internet, and there are a lot of they had some good names this year, but talking about how there were a lot of things that they wished they could have done in the implementation of the infrastructure of the World Wide Web, but weren't able to. There were laws against cryptography at the time. There were cypherpunks were a big thing, and I sort of wish I was part of that movement, but at the same time, I was born late enough to actually have access to all of these things without digging as hard as those people had to have. But I mean, as we have more freedom, I put quotes around that. You know, they're more aggressively and more privately trying to pursue breaking those. You don't really have an expectation of which cryptography is broken until it's far too late in most cases.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and it's kind of like this back and forth of going back, because there's always people that are going to try to strive for said control, and I think it was Corey that mentioned making Ulysses packs in that summit where because everybody's human and everybody's going to be tempted, and I like what Bill said early on about the messaging system that he wanted to engineer that problem of said like the government coming to him and telling him, oh, we need Satori D's emails. Well, okay, but we don't have his password, so you can't even like really read his information. But you could have it. Here you go, like blah blah. You know, we just don't have access to it. But that's what they're talking about in the summit. Like, can we, in the beginning stages of the new Internet 3.0 or decentralized web or whatever you want to term it as, that can we embed maybe some set values or some set principles to try to make this Ulysses pact before some of us get tempted to take control. And this is what we talked about too on the Crypto Hustle show, that is it just naturally, like, even though the DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, it really has a centralized power because a lot of the coins or the ether, the voting power is centralized into a few people. And that's the same thing with the computing power of these huge mining farms. They just naturally, it's a decentralized structure, but there's a centralized group of power, people banding together, and maybe it's not even that nefarious, but there's always that temptation, like power always corrupts. Power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely, type of principle. But anybody else have any thoughts about this? About like kind of being that temptation of power and how there's always this kind of like give and take between centralized and decentralized, and it keeps them going back and forth, kind of like a pendulum.
Yeah, maybe we need to figure out a way to piggyback on the internet and have an internet 3 or something. A network, a decentralized network, but nobody's in charge anywhere, and that would be important. And as far as giving out personal information, all that, I'm sick and tired of giving my information. Let's say I go to a GoFundMe thing, I have to give my name, my address, and no, I don't want that. I mean, if I want to do business with someone, here we go. This is my Bitcoin, or I send Bitcoin there, or whatever. But there's too much information that we have to give away in a centralized system. But in a decentralized system, we don't need to give that much information, and which is for me the most important. We keep our personal information secret. We don't have to shout it out everywhere. I'm so and so, and I live there, and it's like privacy for me is really important. So
yeah, that's kind of like the toll that you have to pay to use these systems, right? You have to give up your personal information. But Bill, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that you shouldn't have to compromise that just to use a service. And I think we all have to be careful of not over associating a positive or negative quality. I mean, because want to force everything to be exactly equal. I mean, there are plenty of instances, like in a meritocracy, where people contribute more to a certain project. If you contribute more to a certain project, then it's okay for you to get rewarded more. So in the DAO, or Bitcoin, or whatever system it is, where there's certain players who are doing it, better than other people. I think that is okay. You just don't want you don't want it to be to the degree where everything can be taken over. But, you want to allow people the incentive to continually be rewarded. So otherwise, people aren't gonna contribute as much. So yeah.
Yeah, that is very true and important. And this is kind of what we were talking about too. We kind of mentioned it. Like it's the proof of kind of like your worth, or proof of your what work you do, and then you should get awarded for that, for what you produce. But at the same time, it shouldn't be where you it's where you gain control, so where you kind of like rig the system for yourself, so but it's just based on kind of merit, or the proof of, of your work.
Yeah, one of the boundaries to access in a lot of the cryptocurrency world, and a lot of these other decentralized tools, is the whole idea of running servers is the only way that you can get rewarded. So I'm trying to put together a white paper about a way to earn votes, or whatever reward it is. But you have to think for the masses. Like yeah, fine, maybe they could eventually hook up their device to the network so that it's helping power the network. But at the end of the day, they're not going to run a farm. They're not going to set up a data center. So you still want to give people who have influence and power on the internet, who don't have those tech skills, the ability to contribute and be rewarded as much. So, and I think one of the reasons the boost and point system on Minds has been so successful, steady over the last year, is that it's accessible to anyone. It's not a reward system that requires you to have technical knowledge. And I think that both reward systems, whether it's from the tech side and running a server that's contributing, that's really important, but also people who know how to drive traffic, people who contribute great content, people who are really active and contributing to the growth of the network in terms of whatever it is. Somehow we have to open up to that more common way of contributing. And so I think as we evolve our reward system on Minds, I'm really interested in rewarding the active people, the most popular people, as well as figuring out a way to have those who are more interested in tech contribute to scaling as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting too. There's a lot of layers to that, of how do you evaluate that said value in relationship to all the things. I think we kind of mentioned this in a previous show with Lee, and that we all have. We always use the term story. We all have like the piece to. No, I think Lee phrased it as what was it, Lee? Not one of us probably doesn't have the answer, but like all of us together have the answer.
Yeah, none of us have the answer alone, but all of us might. And that's sort of an idea that's through WikiBeing. But there was a difficulty with WikiBeing and getting it to the level it needs to be at, and there needs to be a bridge. and that's why I came up with the idea of lobby voice. And that's it sounds political when you start getting into it, but it's really more about the idea that you can take a decentralized organization that creates contracts. Some of the contracts are pre-made. Some of the contracts are just in a tool system that you can make contracts with, and the contracts are just based on your issues. I think there's a website called Issues, and it's basically a crowdfunding website where people have issues and they crowdfund to. I don't know what they do with the money actually. I didn't really look at the deep into it, but it didn't seem like it was going in the right direction, that particular type of website. And so it's kind of the idea of change.org. But instead of using money to get politically involved and funding lobbyists and so on and so forth to try to change policy through political venues, it's more of an idea of being able to create an idea, and then if it's a popular idea, then more people will pledge a small amount of money or a token of some kind. And those tokens can be created. I really like your idea, Bill, about the making things very simple. And it's got to be that way. It's got to be a concept where people can make contracts that are binding and can be locked into code that makes specific terms for creators of decentralized autonomous organizations. But those terms are locked in sort of in a way that those have to be created, and then they have to have all the terms met before the funds are released. So, but the idea covers many ideas, many facets of where we're going, and where we're going is, I think, we're going in a couple of different directions. One direction is, I think, singularity is probably the best description of that direction. Or the idea of we're going to meld and merge into a computer or something like that. And all of technology, in my view, is just going to sort of get smaller and smaller and smaller and almost essentially disappear. It'll be just all the tech people will be sort of a thing of the past. These systems will be just created, and we'll know how to maintenance them, but they'll just kind of be operating in the background, and then we can go back to living a human life, which I don't think we're living a human life, where all of us are actually connected to these screens. We're starting to see the ramifications of that. So being a human being doesn't mean integrating into a computer, no matter how much we want to dream that, I think.
Yeah. Anybody want to touch on that subject? I'm kind of on Lee's page with this, that so far we've been creating we've been working for technology instead of technology working for us. This is kind of like the Douglas Rushkoff's thing, and that I think we are moving towards where, and I always use this statement by it's Alan Watts, and don't mistake the menu for the meal, and the technology will always be the menu, and us experiencing people, in life and nature, and will always be the meal. Anybody want to kind of go with what Lee brought up? Ian.
I was just gonna go ahead and say, there's this idea that code and documentation are law, and I think that any sort of project can be one of the most important parts of the user experience, is actually having that immediate relation with this organization that you are becoming a part of, because you can actually I've said that before, that's the reason I'm into Minds, is because I was able to immediately dig as deep as I could and find everything I could on how it was started, what the philosophies are, the code even. So having all of that up front is really important, having these structures, and social contracts are a good example of how, we've sort of skipped over everything else we could have done with that concept, and we're doing it properly with social contracts and Ethereum. But in our day-to-day lives, I feel like, when you get into a real social contract with someone, there are a lot of ramifications for the way you do things, and that's not only in business. There should be compliances that you have between each other as two parties coming into some sort of an agreement. But I also had a quote from Tim Berners-Lee. He said, "The world today is one where the consumer gets a whole lot of things for free, and the deal the consumer has done is that they sold their soul of their privacy in order to get those things for free. When they give away their privacy to the machine, to the marketing system, to whatever it is that eventually gets the data that has been captured in all these many ways." And I feel like there's Bill has mentioned this before. You have an active choice to choose your proper services. When you're a part of Minds, you always sort of want to choose Minds before everything else. We look for alternatives to Hangouts like this all the time, but you always want to actively make that choice towards the evolution, being a factor towards that change that will eventually create that 100 monkey philosophy change that, once that certain number of people are on board, the things can go viral and it can take off from there. And I think we're really part of that every moment of every day.
Ian, did you want to say something? I saw you.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about what you were saying earlier about God, what were you even saying earlier? I was thinking about it.
Was it the singularity and move, or we are working for technology instead of technology working for us?
Yeah, like it's the meal versus the menu, and
yeah,
technology is like a cheeseburger, which you could consider a piece of technology, even though it's food. We've learned how to eat it, so we've used nature to enhance ourselves. You can abuse it. So if you use your phone to call people, to communicate with people, or to make videos, you're doing it right. You're still a human. You're using it like you'd use a shovel. But if you're lost in it, then you're abusing. It's like using the shovel and hitting someone with it, or just. So in that sense, I feel like technology is natural. I'm almost to the advocate of just plug into the computer and we're all we already might be in. I mean, if you heard Elon Musk say that the odds that we're not in a simulation are 1 in a billion, the odds that we are in a simulation are 999 million out of, that's 99.9999% chance that we're in a simulation. He's just a guy, and they could have pulled the number out of his ass, but it's almost like we're working towards what's already happened.
Yeah. That was Kevin Callie's thing about how technology is just another branch of evolution of ours. And I kind of go into this thing where, they have the story where God built us in its image and we're building technology in our image, in a sense. And if you notice how, Made Safe and all these kind of things, and they talk about, they use nature analogies to try to explain it. It's like, and I think actually, Bill, you brought this up one time, that minds, you kind of vision it as maybe evolving into a global mind or some kind of a global consciousness type of thing, like manifesting that instead a physical structure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is one of the reasons that it's so successful so far, is because people feel resonance with minds, and there's something about that. Our minds are a network, and so creating a physical manifestation of that network is obviously crucial. And in regards to the AI stuff, and that's all inevitable. Yeah, I mean, technology is neutral, and you have proprietary technology and open source technology. So Evan Moglen, who he contributed to writing some of the newer versions of the GPL license, and he runs the Software Freedom Law Center. He's really pretty interesting guy. He talks about, you don't want to fear robots. Robots are neutral. It is the nature of the hardware and the software that is powering those robots which matters. Robots are inevitable. We carry robots around with us. We are becoming robots. Even if we start, injecting layers of, nano material that integrate with our cortex, it doesn't matter as well. That is not going to be something that everyone wants to, but it's not inherently negative, in my opinion, unless the nature of that substance is proprietary. Because if it's open, if it's open, it doesn't guarantee that it's good. It just guarantees that it has the ability to be inspected, and it can be, it at least has a chance to be peer reviewed and deemed okay. And that's why it's actually reassuring that he's doing the whole OpenAI project. That they do see the importance that you cannot let AI get into a proprietary matrix, because then you could literally have unimaginable consequences. Though he does seem to skirt around the issue of open source. You sometimes gets tricky when people use the word open, but they don't specifically say what license they're going to be using. And, like with the whole Tesla battery, they did a big press release that it was open source, but it's not really open source. It's like they've opened it so that you can license it from them, but to my knowledge, it's not actually using an open source license. When we release all the rest of the engine, it's all going to be under, most likely, the AGPL v3 license, which is a free software license. And so it's really important for that to be distinguished. I think that, I don't know, I'd really like to see Elon go more into depth about that.
Yeah, that would that would be interesting. But I think too, and this is where the whole importance of what we're talking about here, and we got into examples and stuff, but the principles of decentralization and open source, so that things are an even playing field, and that are neutral, and that it's open, so it's voluntary for every individual to make their choice on how to use that technology and how that technology is used on them is I think a fundamental principle. I think almost everybody could agree on, of how we move forward, because we're entering a very brave new digital world of all sorts of and it's neutral. It could be the greatest imaginarium, or it could be the greatest nightmare. And this is really interesting, that which I like. I mean, there's not only our conversation that we're having here, but conversations like this happening all the time and everywhere. And I think what you were saying about what make minds, or at least with me and with the people that I talk to, is that we all came to minds because we were tired of how Facebook was turning things into being like, robots, like where you just like things passively, where you post this stuff, but there's no real social networking happening. There's no real interaction that was happening. And I remember when I first came onto Minds, that was like the biggest thing, that you could have like these really wild conversations organically and spontaneously. I mean, especially for us that have been here a while, how hard it was kind of to use in the beginning as well. But a lot of people have said this, is that what keeps everybody at Minds is kind of the culture, is kind of this common culture, this kind of people trying to be open source in their philosophy of sharing their information with each other, of developing these relationships. And that's where the meal is at. and that Minds is the menu that is helping us to make a great meal, helping us to create great and beautiful things, and that we could all in this open source philosophy and in a decentralized way add to that structure, and then hopefully there's like this ecology and this whole thing about that. But yeah, Lee.
Like when I look at the direction, it's very simple for me. The internet is like the central nervous system, and open source is and decentralization and the ability for each unit to have a node is likened to each cell in the body having the DNA packet of information. So it's almost like technology for me and my idea of the way it's going to roll or where it should roll is and as technology integrates into us and we integrate into it, and what it means is that we're all privy to all the same information, and that's really the goal, that every last person has access to information, regardless of what we do with it, and I think that that's also up to each individual, but that we work as the body works all together, and the mind is like the government. And a healthy mind is a good government, is a good governing thing. It gets up every morning and it's disciplined and does exercise. I like your is it burpees that you've been doing, Bill? That's a comment that you made a week ago or so.
Yeah, man, burpees changed my life.
So it's kind of creating this healthy mind and the information that's being distributed through all the nodes, and the nodes are us, each individual person. So I think whenever we're thinking about design, biology should be should be closely in our mind.
In addition to that, so I'm thinking, like how like bitcoins are formed, data is processed, and it causes this proof of creation, which is basically the value. So if we're socially networking and I type a comment to you, technically that creates data and could contribute towards a currency. But what I'm thinking is just like neurons in the brain, when one neuron fires, it gives you this amount. When this neuron fires, it gives you this amount. But when they fire together, they give you more than either one of them, more than double. It gives you more than the sum. And that's the way nature and biology works. Like two people can carry 100-pound whatever. But so could we build a system that our activity not only creates currency, but our combined activity creates a greater sum of it? And so that would be like likening it to like how if 8 of us are in a room, we're going to have way more knowledge than 8 times 1.
Yeah. And that is actually, I believe, when they kind of describe a little bit of MadeSafe, they equate it to an ant colony. And so one ant by itself doesn't do much, it can't carry much. But when you had the whole swarm of the ants working together in concert, they could lift branches, and they can move, and they can make the ant hill. But it's kind of weird what Bill was saying earlier about there's a combination of both. In an ant colony too, you have a centralized power in that structure, as well as that each individual is doing his thing. So that's kind of interesting. What we're looking towards nature as said, because nature has great technology. Our minds are probably the greatest computing networking machine that we know of. In this known universe, and to look for answers. Maybe Phil, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I sort of think like minds as a bridge between. Well, the mind is a bridge between your brain and consciousness. That's sort of because when people refer to the mind, sometimes they'll just interchange brain and mind, but really they're not exactly the same. And I think it's just about creating something that represents humanity the best. So the top networks now don't. Wikipedia comes the closest. Reddit's open source. WordPress. These are the only in the top 100 sites networks in the world. The only networks that even are close at representing the people. And so we just know that it's inevitably going to happen in the social networking space, because a social network is a piece of technology that most closely resembles how humans communicate. So Wikipedia, unfortunately, isn't really built on a platform that if Wikipedia, I think there's a great collaboration we could do between Wikipedia and Minds, because I think if Wikipedia had a social network behind it, it would be unstoppable. It's actually incredible that Wikipedia is a top 10 site in the world, and so relatively few people contribute to it. Tons of people read it, but it's pretty inaccessible for a normal person to contribute. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for Wikipedia and a way more efficient, less complicated interface to arise to help supercharge the growth of that commons of information.
Yeah, and I like that it's like, so we have crowdsourcing for funds, but it's, well, we do this already naturally, but maybe as far as a social networking site and with like a Wikipedia backing of it could kind of make this crowdsourcing of knowledge, crowdsourcing of, this is kind of what Lee's thing is with the wiki being, is that how do we come together to express ourselves in a safe manner, and then making these deep connections that go, that when I share a story about my life, and if it's, that's what's the great thing about art, right? Art, the truest form of art is just the expression of yourself, but if you dig deep enough within yourself, that's expressing all of humanity. And it's Lee, do you want to add to maybe that thing about wiki being?
Yeah. So the first concept when I first started thinking about Wikibeing was medical, and getting a medical database based on individuals, and it could be anonymous so that they could, you know, uh, remain anonymous with their medical records, but they can share their experiences. And then it stemmed another idea, which was Mind Body Journey, which was sort of just a simple journal for people that are going through whatever illness. And then the concept expanded into, well, it could be anything. It could be all experiences, all human experiences that are notable. A lot of the types of experiences that go to the grave with people that they never talk about. The kinds of experiences that actually hinder them from growth, or keep them in a mental ill state. So Wikibeing is not like Wikipedia in the sense of knowledge, scientific knowledge, and stuff like that, but it's more in the sense of human knowledge, and how that's relative to us.
Yeah, I think this is because there's so many different aspects to what there is to be in this reality and to be a human. And I totally agree with what Bill brought up, is that the people mistake, the mind for consciousness, and Lee uses the term that we're just a rover. I know Tech Lords really illustrates this concept as well, but that, and this is the experience that you get, and this is why we always come, and I know Bill's on this page with the Creative Commons, is an idea. Like, people say, oh, it came from like my mind or whatever, but when you really look at the creative process, it seems like we're kind of in a sense downloading said data, and then processing it through our minds, and then it comes out, because because how do these ideas simultaneously happen throughout the world? Like, I mean, I'm so fascinated with synchronicities and developments in science, and that have these parallels between each other. But I think we're getting to a point where we could create, say, a physical structure that could help facilitate this in a better manner. And I kind of came up with this concept of so if ideas are networks, then these experiences of like synchronicities and all this kind of stuff are deep network connections, that they're going deep in the sense of the kind of like in a metaphysical sense, they're going past these networks, and these networks are just a representation of that, and it's moving to streamlining stuff and to accelerating it. But the thing itself is a little bit, I feel, in my experience of stuff, it's a little bit, I like to use this term that I used in a poem once, that I'm just a pen a lot of times. Like, things just, when I get in a creative flow of something, you have that stream of consciousness, and you surprise yourself, and but once you get outside of that, you get that ego that comes in there, then you lose the flow, you lose that kind of Tao, and there's always this little battle between your ego and the Tao when I have a creative experience. But anybody else, like Tech Lords, do you want to bring up something about that? I think that concept's always interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. I just want to rewind a little bit. Lee was talking about the balance between, technology and being human. I think I went a little bit too far on the side of computers in the past 20 years. I mean, right now I spend at least 8 hours a day on internet, which by some people will say that's way too much, but it's a way of living for me. I don't have many friends. I have one that is very 5 minutes away, Crypto Hustle, but everybody else is all over the world. So for me, technology is very important to reach out to people and to communicate and to exchange. So that's my point of view on that.
Yeah. Anybody else want maybe Gus Spiders about the balance between technology, reality, and experience of that? Because I think everybody kind of has that struggle with the balance, and I mean, there's a balance. We always have this struggle of balance. Do you want to touch on that, Gus Spiders?
The balance between the proprietary and what the industry would call open sorcery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know where my boundary is at as far as the balance. I've more been haunted by this philosophy for the last couple of years, that I'll be using some sort of technology, and I'll just think to myself, well, I don't know everything that went into building this. I don't know everything about this electronic I'm using. I don't understand, the entire process that went into making this. And, a good percent of the time I'll just start taking that thing apart until I can look inside and, oh, well, what is that? Now I need to go look that up online. And, I like to learn about everything that I use. Otherwise, sometimes I don't feel like I have the right to use it. And that sort of goes along with the open source technologies. You want to at least a great deal before investing your trust into them. And so, even I've looked in a lot to RFIDs for, just doing small things wirelessly. Like, people will walk up to their front door and turn their fist, and the door will unlock, or keyless ignition for their cars, or NFC tag scanners at work to get in the building, kind of things like that. But I wouldn't ever pursue those technologies unless I understood the exact hardware, the exact way it was wrapped for implementation into probably my hand. But then I would also want to be the one to write and compile the code that's actually running inside of my body. If I ever went that far, I don't want to be running someone else's code as part of my being. It kind of crosses a weird line for me that if I'm not capable, I don't want it to be a part of me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Anybody else? Maybe Ian or Bill, about balance of, let's say, technology and life and everything.
It's huge. Like I think eventually like the sun I think is flashing at like 60 hertz, and our screens are flashing at like 30 hertz. So you get and our light bulbs are flashing at 30 hertz. They're not resonating at the same frequency that the sun is. So I think once we can get our technologies to resonate at the same frequency as the sun, it's going to be way better for us to engorge in them. But any way you break it down, man, food, water, oxygen, this is the basics. And I don't think, at least right now, I don't think that that can be ignored.
Yeah, that's the meal. But that is kind of interesting too. Is once the technology gets to that level, then it won't be as bad on us on our eyes and us physically. Which is an interesting thought. Bill, anything on a balance between technology and being?
Yeah. Well, I have a computer like on my body right now. It's really hot, which is weird. I don't feel too good about that. I think that the whole radiation issue is. MIT just came out with an article saying, sort of endorsing a recent study about that that there's some pretty strong links between the radiation and some forms of cancer. So, but that being said, I think that it's not definitive yet. But that's something to be aware of as we fuse together more. There are definitely health issues with mental and physical, with just being too drowned in it, and that's why for this year, I think it makes your experience on the internet so much more valuable when it's getting balanced with a healthy lifestyle, generally speaking. I think that it's a really scary future vision to just imagine. What's that animated movie where there's just all those huge obese people wheeling around, and they just own. Everyone has like the motorized cart, and everybody's hooked up to the machine, and everybody's like totally unhealthy. Anyone know what movie I'm talking about? It's like a Pixar kind of movie. Wall-E, yeah, yeah. I think that that's really scary, and so, but that's not a judgment on technology. That's human behavior.
Yeah.
So,
But it's kind of funny what we were doing with the the 24-hour Imaginarium. We were facilitating the network to, in a sense, to be more conscious, and they have the room set up for breathing. And there was this funny moment when I was talking to Carmen One. She was getting frustrated because she couldn't get into the breathing room to do meditation. And so this is kind of like a funny story that was being illustrated. Here she was trying to get into the breathing room to do the whole 24-hour Imaginarium so she could meditate and be more conscious. But she was getting frustrated with the technology. And then her young daughter told her, Mom, can't you just, there's a breathing room like right here. Like, you don't need the technology to do that. It was help facilitating this whole thing. But you know what I mean? Like, you could just meditate right now if you wanted to. But it's so we're so engrossed in this technology is that, and I think this goes back to what Gov Spires was saying, that you either help facilitate you to be more conscious in a sense, or to be less conscious of what's going on, and kind of just let the machinery handle it, and you just blindly follow along, and whatever the the powers that be tell you, okay, just click on this or click on that, and we'll take care of your news feed. You don't have to worry about it. We have an algorithm that will make sure that we'll send you everything you need according to your taste. But yeah, that's a scary world. But I think that it. I think we're illustrating that point, but that it. But even without the technology is neutral. Even without that technology, I think us as humans have always had this struggle, because we have this struggle of being conscious. Like it has great things for us as far as we create, reality. Basically, we have been able to hack into consciousness, or hack into the natural flow of things, and been able to create reality. And we have created some good realities and a lot of bad realities. And we have this struggle of trying to find that balance, or trying to go back to. I always look to Eastern philosophy, so the Tao, which is just basically means the natural flow of things, and basically that's what meditation is about. Is just trying to go back to consciousness without the ego, which is kind of like this filter of it, and where we mistake a little bit of and I think that's kind of goes what I personally take us being in a simulation, is that it's actually our mind. It's a metaphor in a sense that our minds what do you call it, creates a virtual or simulation of what actual reality is, based on our beliefs, based on our biases. But I think that's what part of growth is to open source your mind, to look in to the working of your mind. And this is what kind of like what Wikibeing, what art, what stuff that we're doing on minds helps people to do. And you always hear these people say, I forgot how I was, prior to using Minds, or I like Minds so much because I have these great conversations, or I'm able to think of things in different ways. And it's the technology is helping facilitate that, but it's this open nature of kind of expressing ourselves.
Yeah, I think that is one of the most powerful things that we can keep trying to create, is an atmosphere where that facilitates creativity, a place where people feel comfortable to express what they're actually thinking, and don't feel like they're in some sort of a prison system that is going to punish them for saying what they're actually thinking. And so, it's interesting working with an uncensored environment, because there's, it forces us to allow ourselves to coexist with people that we completely don't agree with, people that we are totally offended by. And a lot of people don't understand that. They think that, you should delete something because it's offensive, and maybe there are cases where, if it's pushing for violence or something like that, maybe there is a line where but I don't. There is no clear line for sure. But that's one of the things that makes me happy on a daily basis, to see these posts of people. Like, there was this one guy a couple days ago who, on his profile, he was saying how he's bipolar, he has bipolar disorder, and that, he was just shocked at the fact that he felt comfortable to share a photo of himself on Minds. Is that's just really uplifting to me. And people don't even like posting on Facebook. People don't feel comfortable posting there anymore, and that's why they're seeing huge drops in their engagement. And interestingly, though, Snapchat, which is proprietary and has all sorts of messed up issues. One of the cool things about Snapchat is that, besides the fact that the tech is pretty slick, if it was open source, it would be awesome. But and hopefully we can play with some things that they do in the future. But people feel comfortable there to create this amazing media of their lives and share. And partially that's because they think that it's getting deleted and that it's fleeting and that they have that sort of illusion of privacy. Who knows if all that stuff's actually deleted? Probably not. I think so. I saw someone, maybe Luke Radowski, covered something about how it wasn't getting deleted. I mean, I want to look more into the evidence about that. But how they've been successful is creating a place where people will. No one would ever post something that they post on Snapchat on their Facebook, but it's the same person, and for some reason they feel comfortable expressing themselves on Snapchat. So I applaud Snapchat for creating an environment that is contributing to, I think, valuable art and valuable self-expression. It would be cool if they engage in kind of tech conversations, which they don't, and they don't care about privacy, and they don't care about freedom of information, and that's too bad. But I think that, yeah, it's just about creating that open environment.
Yeah, yeah. There's, that's the thing about self-censorship, and that's what you see on Facebook. And you could lose your job if you post, a picture that is not in the best light of you or whatever. But Gov Spiders, I know you're about this issue of censorship and the blocking feature. We always have these kind of conversations. Do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I said a little earlier in chat, you need to lock the web open. And there are a lot of people that follow that philosophy of, anything that ever enters the internet is going to stay there in that form. It's going to be archived somewhere. It's going to be replicated by who knows how many people. But at the same time, there's also this need for privacy, and that's where code is law comes in, and you can actually, cryptographic protocols are code. They are law. So we still have all of these things within our realm to decentralize and still protect our data and our privacy within services. Even if it's up in the air, even if 100 people are holding encrypted content, it does nothing for them without the key. So it gets to this point that there's also that thought that it'll become too overloaded with things at that point if nothing is ever deleted. But there's also the idea that we will exponentially always grow in our capacity to house this storage and increase these networks.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely. Oh, nice, Tim. Welcome to. Great to see you.
Welcome, Tim.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you all tonight?
Good, good. So actually, let's bring up Safe and this whole decentralization and about. I know too you're big on expression of people and empowering people and how Safe could help facilitate that.
So Tori D, if I might jump in real quick, I think
go
that
ahead.
I think the N99 project is really relevant to what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, Tim, please.
Well, yeah.
Us.
Yeah, well, I mean, for everyone, it's kind of an overview of N99. It's been driven from a creative point of view. The whole idea of it behind N99 is to give everybody a platform with no middlemen on the Safe network, to basically have no middlemen between them, what they produce, and the audience that are out there looking for it. And there's sort of 2 points from listening to sort of like, I picked up this conversation, and there's 2 points I really want to rewind to. And one was the point, and I think it was you, Tori, that said that how a lot of the team around MadeSafe, and it's been my drive for a long time, has been around ants in particular. I've been fascinated with ants since I was a child. And I think it's you that mentioned that, you know, you were fascinated between the duality, and you mentioned how that the great fascination has been a decentralized nature of the ant colony. But you said, but there's a duality in the fact it was a centralized that equally. Now I'm fascinated about what part of the ant colony do you think do you envision as being centralized?
The queen, don't they have a queen?
Yeah, but the queen's sole role is just to produce more ants. I mean, the role of the queen is a very kind of solitary role. She's just basically, from the moment she's flees one colony, she'll go out, she'll mate with the male ant in the flying season. She'll crawl away, dig a hole, and she'll produce. And she'll produce first of all, her little clan of worker ants who will then just look after her. And her role for the rest of her life is just to produce and produce and produce and produce. She has no central control at all. She's just there as the producing of the next generation of ants. And that's a fascinating thing about ants. I mean, I've read a lot of studies. I've done a lot of research into ants, and it's like a lot of things in nature. There is no central control at all. Now, I think that's, to a lot of people, they're always looking for central control, and I think it's behind a lot of the conspiracies and a lot of the ideas in this world that people have about, oh, there's got to be some great overview or some overlord or some alien out. No. And it's like in nature. I think that's the thing that scares human beings most, is that the nature of everything in the universe is ultimately quite chaotic. And this is what you find in ant colonies and in swarms of birds and in nature in general, that there tends to be, although there's pecking orders, and that's another thing, but there tends to be very little central control, and especially when you get down to insect level, it's very much how they do it. I mean, this is still to the thing that we as humans are still learning. We're still trying to find out, what is the thought process. But all you do understand is, and I'm sure you discussed it many times on this before, you do see it all over nature, and it's not just the insects, you see it in plant life and everything else. And I think, sort of leading this back to where N99 steps into it, and MadeSafe particularly step into it, I think we're at this moment, and I think, like you mentioned earlier on, how many ideas come up at the same time around the world, and I think there's more and more humans all around the world, particularly in our Western world, are coming to the realization, which you mentioned before, it's a realization that the Eastern philosophies have had for thousands of years about, instead of us, like we have done in the Western world, of being against nature, we've got to understand and go with nature and start to understand and look at nature and look at how it works and functions. And once you start doing that, how, like you mentioned earlier on, how Japanese culture does this, Chinese culture, a lot of Asian cultures, they understand this, as you call it, the chi of life, the Tao, the essence of what nature is. And if you go with that, it leads to a more harmonious existence. I mean, do you think it's any coincidence that the people that live the longest in this planet are the Japanese? The people who are the happiest are the people living in Scandinavia, all of which are having this essence of understanding nature solely because of the environment they live in, I think. But that's just my general overview, so just a general sort of thought process. But that was, as far as I understand it, my understanding sort of bounces back about what the Queen's role in ants and the colonies. I'm sure I'm always open to any more knowledge. If anyone has any out there, please let me know.
No, yeah, I think I'm with you too about the decentralized nature of nature or reality. But what I find funny, there's this quote is that some people think that about there's somebody in control, but the most scariest thought is that there's actually no one in control. I like that quote. I think it's by Terence McKenna. But let's get into a little bit of the SAFE network and how is it relevant to the ant colony, or why the ants is a good way to describe it.
Well, as you'll find, I mean, the more research people do into the SAFE network, you will sort of see a lot of the terms that come up are very much like we have vaults, and there's a lot of sort of speak about ants and stuff. Even the whole nature of the I host a regular meeting called Ants, and we discussed the whole decentralized technologies and stuff. And I think that the real the relevance I sort of see, speaking from a completely a non-programmer point of view, is that the safe network is the idea of linking up everybody's computer in a decentralized manner. And the network in itself is a completely live, no central control, completely in its essence a decentralized, just logging of everybody's computer, just in the same way as an ant colony is. So it locks up. And then you have things like, so this is like, for instance, what N99 is, if you strip it right down to its essence, it's going to be a grand vault, which is basically going to be a grand collection of places where information about a certain piece of data will be, that part of the information will be stored in a vault. Now the thing about the safe network is it will, and again I would urge anybody to go and do as much research as possible, because I just speak from a completely everyday perspective. I am no programmer by any stretch of the imagination, so please if I make technical overviews that maybe not as technically correct, I'd recommend everybody go and read. But in essence, what the safe network will do, and what the essence of it, it will strip a piece of data into grains of sand and distribute them amongst all the people who are into the network. And that's what you do. So when you log in, you give a part of your computing space, and you say, okay, this I will add to the network's memory space. And I think the idea with the really sort of fits overlays with nature and the ants is that they've really looked at it, and that's why I was inspired by it, because I got into sort of the Bitcoin thing, and I always sort of saw that the problem with a lot of it was always the fact of at some level there was always a barrier. There was always a barrier to entry, or this, and I like the simplicity of ants and what they did with MadeSafe and how they based it on nature and said, well, for anything to be successful, for any great new technology to be successful, it's got to be applicable and available to everybody, which means stripping something right down, which in essence is very simple but very difficult. And I don't know how far we want to go into that rabbit hole of what's going on recently, but they have, it's a very difficult process, and and I think I think the essence of where we are and where we stand in these times is, and I sort of bridge this gap, and I think a lot of people in this conversation bridge the gap. I think particularly I see a lot of decentralization popping up all over the place, but what I personally think is missing is the connections between them all, because I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on a sole project or a sole individual or a sole group of people doing one project, when in essence actually for this to go through, like you were saying earlier on, it comes from all people from everywhere, and it equally means that the ones that win, the reason we've all got electricity and the reason we all use certain things, okay, there was arguments about how they came about, but in essence, because they all work and they're functional, that's why we don't use steam anymore, because a new technology came along that was more efficient, more, everyday possible. And this is what I see with decentralizing generally. And that's what I love about, I think the sort of title you put onto the strap of this whole conversation was linking minds and made. And I think it's essential, because I think at the moment we have these little groupings of programmers over here, the arts community over here, the thinkers over there, the people who have no interest over here, the people who have a bit of interest over here, the speculators, and they're all just grouping around, and in essence, what I think is essential, and this is what I think is really, I think really inspiring about these conversations, and it's why it's necessary, is finding, not only just talking about things, but finding solutions about how we can actually bridge these gaps and actually put actual concrete steps along the way, and rather than just having talking shops, and think, okay, how can we make practical solutions to make these things happen? Because in what holds us all in common is we all have that common, we all want the same desire. We just don't want the middlemen. And I think it's just, in essence, finding ways of breaking down the barriers, and that's what I love about open source. But I can understand equally, I've gone down the rabbit hole of open source, and I throw this open to everybody else, and this is one of I think the weaknesses I found about open source is that people put stuff on open source, everything, all their knowledge is taken, their project is taken away, people run away with it, make speculation, and then the whole idea is lost because everyone's disillusioned with the whole idea. And I think that's one of the dualities of open source, is that we have got this nature of privacy, which we're talking about, of keeping certain ideas private, but equally putting that out into the commonwealth of human knowledge, and there comes that duality of what do we do as human beings? How much of the creativity, like me as a painter, when I like to paint, as much as I can go out and paint in public, most of my stuff is done in a dark room by myself under candlelight, and I think that's the essence of creativity, and it's finding the balance of how we do this. So it's finding the balance of how we connect people, but equally don't just make us all just where every thought is open, because that's the general path we're going on at the moment. Everything is going to a point where all our thoughts, privacy is becoming an old word, and more and more people have got less and less understanding what privacy is about. So we've got to push into the future and knowing the privacy, but equally keeping that and balancing it with an open source mentality, which is, I don't know, I open that up to everybody in this discussion. I find ways of bridging that bridge are, I think, one of the most essential questions we have of our times.
Yeah, and I think this is something Bill brought up and probably would want to touch on, is how do you have that balance between the open, but also to value or said someone's work, their input into the community, and how do we properly value that and give them that value?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting idea. In terms of software, I don't tend to think that there's much reason to keep that secret. Software is a little bit different from general knowledge because it's something that's interacting with people's devices and data. And I think that kind of has to be open. So as opposed to a private conversation that you're having with somebody, I think that there's a little bit of distinction, because software is something that is behaving a little bit differently than just content. But there are definitely some similarities, and it's not black and white. I mean, there's an age-old argument that, proprietary software, a lot of proprietary advocates will say that it's more secure because nobody knows exactly how it works. But I mean, if you look at like Bruce Schneier's blog, he does a really interesting article about why open source encryption is crucial. And Schneier is the guy who he handles a lot of the Snowden documents and analysis of them for The Guardian. He's a cryptography expert and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, you're going to have the strongest product if everybody has access to it. So it's just inevitable. I mean, it's really annoying, actually, that Google and Facebook don't open source more of their software, because we've spent the last 5 years building mines because they're proprietary. If Google or Facebook had just open sourced everything, then we would have been able to put all of our energy into help making what they did better. But they're keeping it secret, so it's stifling innovation dramatically. So yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are about, like, what would the argument be for keeping software proprietary?
Sorry.
Go ahead, my friend.
When you're saying the argument of the proprietary creator would be that it's more secure, you could have a secure system that's very destructive, but it's just securely destructive, and you could have a secure system that is not destructive. So you don't know if it's destructive or not. That's the problem. It may be secure. It doesn't matter if you don't know. And so it's a different kind. The security in knowing whether or not it's destructive is different than actual physical security, uncorruptible security.
Right, and that proprietary software, it could potentially be a piece of proprietary software that is more secure than a piece of open source software. open source software is not necessarily more secure. It could be full of bugs and vulnerabilities. But the point with proprietary software is that there is no way for them to prove to the public that it is. So it doesn't even matter is because there is no way for us to know, and they can't prove it. With open source, it is provable. So you can't expect the masses to just take a corporation's word and trust. Like, this whole decentralization movement is about getting away from having to trust somebody's word.
Yeah, it's the proof of work. And this is kind of what we brought up in our last conversation of the last show. We're moving to a rule by proof, being able to be able to prove your work. Like, Unger has to trust people's word, and it's about what they do. And but maybe let's anybody have the thoughts of trying to find some balance between. I guess I want to go back to the creative content that someone produces, and how do you be able to compensate them, um, you know, give them the compensation that they deserve, I guess, or the value of their compensation. Because I think that's what the N99 project's about. But anybody have a thought about that? Because a lot of us create work, and you put in a lot of work into different stuff that you do, and that work should be valued.
100%. As you know, I'm at heart an artist, and that's been my drive completely behind N99, because I just think it's, to me, but it's always been a simple vision, and it's just a case of getting it built. I mean, to me, it's like I look at the examples we look at now. You look at YouTube, you look at SoundCloud, Bandcamp. Now, everybody, for instance, I know bands who are getting huge amounts of hits on YouTube and getting likes, but they're getting no rewards, as you quite rightly said. So at the moment, there's this imbalance of, like, we're producing all the content for these platforms like YouTube. They get all the rewards, and what do we get as creatives? Nothing. Now, I've tried to wrestle long and hard with it, and the solution I came with N99 was just basically seeds, which was basically, for every, you put a piece of content out, just like you would on YouTube or SoundCloud, and a seed is a like. So for putting up content, we will give you a seed. The seed, then if you get after a certain amount, it goes through we haven't quite decided yet, but a threshold is reached, and then we give you another seed. And then those seeds can be traded and exchanged on, decentralized safe exchanges and stuff, which are coming, and there's many, and then it's just a case of, great, so then people have got something that they've created and that the audience can reward them directly for. That can be used within the network for whatever, because if you've got an amount of likes, it means likes in 1999 will basically mean you'll have more up the charts, if you understand what I'm saying. It'd be like a ranking system. So the more, bands and people will want more and more likes, because that would be the natural way of the audience in a decentralized way, without any control of pointing to people's audience and saying, look, this is what's worth listening to, because we as an audience have liked. We all understand the concept of how likes, what they do, and it's a really great decentralized way of people in a non-controlled way of dictating what's good and bad, which is the whole essence of decentralization. So that's how I see it with seeds, because I think it's quite simple. I think I've given the opportunity on N99 where you can basically give your stuff away for free and you'll be rewarded for it. If you give your stuff away and you want to charge for it, we won't give you a seed initially, but you can still put your stuff out there and do it. Or if you want to just solely have it out to charge, okay. I think of the three options going forward. I think the days of people ever going to be able to pay money for content that's digital are gone. That's my personal opinion. I think there's going to be, I think for bands to make stuff and get rewarded in the future, once the barriers, which N99 and the Safe Network and other ones are going to bring down the barriers of how we can easily just get the exchange between people and the audience and what their creators get done. Once all those barriers are broken down, that opens up a whole new paradigm. And I just see it as an inevitable step in this direction, because I think the inevitable step is going to be where bands, for instance, and musicians and stuff are going to. We've all got to the point where we're going to want to give stuff away, because that's the essence of being a creative person. You want to give the creativity away. You don't want to hold it to yourself. And in essence, the balance will be backwards again. That, for instance, something I paint or something you write as an individual, something you actually put your heart and soul and you've actually maybe handcrafted, that should have value. And that's where I think bands in the future, I don't think there's going to be a future for bands charging for stuff digitally, but I think there's going to be a great future for bands who put stuff into making LPs or cassettes, which is one of the great things that I'm seeing coming through in England now. There's this whole rise in Scotland of people making cassettes. They're making a resurgence because people are willing to pay for something that's been hand done. And this is where I just think N99 and Safe Network particularly it's just another step along this direction of just dissolving the barriers and making it easy to go, okay, instead of reinventing the world, how does the world look right now? Okay, people are giving stuff away. How can we reward people just for liking stuff? And that's what I try to do with N99. I'm just trying to strip it right down to, okay, let's make it simple. You put stuff out, you get liked, you get rewarded. That can either be used for exchanging for anything. That's what I love about decentralization. I come up with an idea, and someone else has an idea that locks onto that. You know what I mean? For N99 perfectly. I mean, the idea of a safe exchange going alongside that, an exchange where I can swap a seed for, I don't know, a bag of potatoes, or I could swap, whatever I wanted to swap for anything else without having to sometimes have this kind of fiat currency, or even a Bitcoin, or even a MaidSafe coin, or any sort of currency between it. Just I can go there and swap this for that, just because we've got an understanding of what one is value to the other. And this is when I think the paradigm shift that's going on. I think more and more people are understanding that the value of what we call money is just an illusion, and what we're going to come down to, like it does in real life between all of us, is the value of what you've got in your hand now compared to what the person opposite you requires. And I've often used this example. I lived in Venezuela on a beach, and I could have $50 in my pocket, which is a given currency in Venezuela when I lived there, but the guy coming to me who's walking on the beach and he needs his boat painting, he doesn't give a toss about how much money I've got in my pocket. He's like, can you paint? Are you able to paint my boat? Yes. Do you want cash exchange for it? No, but I'll swap that for, maybe a month in your house. Great. That's how real life works. And this is what the dissolving of the barriers which we're seeing in decentralization through the sources like mines and all these different sources. We're seeing this dissolving of all these barriers, which is basically making, it's like you're saying, plug into this greater network of human knowledge, and from that is going to come ideas that none of us, and I think this is the great understanding, and I think the great wisdom, none of us can say with any clarity we know what's going to happen, what the world's going to be like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. And that's why I, for a long time, gave up even trying to speculate, because you can go down dystopian nightmares, you can go down to utopia, hippie visions, and the truth is, none of us know. And I think that's a very wise thing for us to say, because we live in a world where everybody's got an answer and a solution and this and that, and the truth is none of us know. All we do know is we've got this moment now, and it's what we do with this moment now. And that's why I keep always trying to bring it back to, is how can we move forward? For instance, going back to 99, I'm in a position now where, okay, I want to use all these open source, I want to get this built. How do I connect people like myself who've got creative ideas? How do I connect with people like open source programmers? That bridge needs to be solved, and I'm sure there's ways and means of doing it, but I'm sure there's many people who've got many ideas, and we're going to be the leading lights of this. But there's going to be a load of people follow us and going, okay, how can I easily connect to people who've got the skills to program it? And I love talking to people like yourself, especially the coders and the programmers amongst this conversation, because to me, there's a lot of synergy between what we, the creative, do and what you do. But again, there's this barrier between us, and this is what I love about these conversations opening up, because we all want the same thing. So I open this up again. That's how can we open up the conversations? Where can someone like me go to get these things built in a way where, and let's be true about it, let's be real about it, especially people who are creative, we have a very long history of being ripped off. And I found this, I suddenly got, doing my crowd sale, I suddenly got resources, and oh yeah, I've got people coming out the door trying to charge me this and charge me that and demand this out. I mean, do I want to join this? And I'm like, no, I just want to, I've got the resources, I just want to get things done and built. And I think that's I would love to hear answers to that. Where's the best way of finding out how someone like me who's got the resources and idea can get stuff built and to actually make these things happen. So we're not just sitting around in 2 years' time talking about things.
Yeah, that is interesting. Because we're moving. Like you said, like money is, the menu, and the meal is the actual doing and the resources of it. So how do I think we all understand this, but that's where we have to open up our idea of value and what is real value, and it's those resources and the actual doing of things. And a lot of times it's the middlemen that take control of stuff, and they determine the value, and they devalue the actual work that is being done. And can we move to a more truer value of economy? I would like to Bill's kind of take on what Tim was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that we're moving beyond sort of the old ways of exchanging value, and uh, there's just there's so many different forms of currency emerging that, but again, it's not going to be a singular next step, and that's probably the hardest thing to grasp, because uh, it's there's a tendency to just want to simplify things and have a singular source be the next phase. And you know what, maybe there will be some sort of intermediary semi decentralized thing that beats Google and Facebook first, and then that leads into something that is truly decentralized. I was watching a talk by Dimitri Kleiner, who is a really interesting programmer and speaker about all of this. He's actually the one who introduced me to ZeroNet, and um, he was saying that actually, an open source Facebook is not. It's really not what we need, but it's a step in the right direction. But it's not what we need. But maybe that needs to play a role, and maybe that's going to be a part in the progression to something truly decentralized. So I don't know. I mean, when you look at the Alexa rankings for the top 100 networks in the world, I mean, there is going to have to come a stage where something becomes number one. Like it's Google and Facebook number one and number two right now, and so in order for something open and free to become number one, that is going to have to be a centralized network, because the way that the internet rankings work is according to, well, no, it doesn't have to be a centralized network, but it has to use a domain name, and so there's going to have to be something that rises, and something will inevitably take them out. So it's all everything that we're doing is a step in the right direction. So I'm feeling positive about it, and it seems like things are accelerating.
Yeah, definitely they're accelerating. Anybody else maybe have? I know Lee. I remember early on in some of your posts you're talking about. I forgot exactly what it is, like some kind of barter system, in a sense.
Like early on, like last year, posts. Well, I think that there's all kinds of things that we need to be concentrating on, and I do think that the question, where are the open source programmers? It seems to me that there's just not enough incentive, and so I think that one of the things that we need to start thinking about is how to create incentives for those builders to come and build these ideas out, because there are a lot of incredible ideas online.
Well, on that one, Lee, I mean, and again, I was opening this up generally. I mean, how does there's kind of two general schools of thought. There's a school of thought of basically, do you just basically hire people and they say to them, I want this bill, or, and this is one I'm more favouring towards, I like the idea of bounties and saying, look, we want this doing, this is what you'll get for the work when it's completed, and then it's almost done through, and especially on the open source way, I think it's a really efficient way of getting work done, because I don't know, I just give my opinion, I just think there's a tendency if you hire a human being and say to him, do that, they have a tendency to be lazy, and then before you know, all your resources are gone. I've just seen it so many times with bands, and I've seen it so many times, and I like the idea of bounties, and I don't know if that's something that is common amongst the open source community, or how does people generally feel about the idea of having splitting a set of work, like for instance, building of N99 or building of mines into a section of bounties. How does that, is that something that's used in the open source
Yeah,
community?
there's a site called Bounty Source. If you go to bountysource.com, it's for specifically open source projects, and list tasks with rewards on there, and people can just show up, and if they do the right job, then they get paid. At the end of the day, though, in regards to your question about getting the development done and networking with the open source programmers, I mean, for us, what's helped us move the fastest is just being able to hire some developers, and so I understand that it's not the end game. You definitely want something more distributed to be that's what can really go viral. I mean, if you look at the development of all the top open source projects, I'd actually be curious about what percentage of the accepted contributions come from the community versus come from the paid workers, especially on projects like Linux. I'd be curious, but it's definitely some balance between the two. So I know if we had waited for the community to build what we've been building, I don't know what would have happened. It's really hard to tell. And when we release the rest of the stack in later this summer, I'm hoping that it'll just explode on a level that we can't really even imagine.
Yeah. Okay, so we've gone over 2 hours. So I think what I like to kind of end up with is that we'll go one by one, kind of wrap up maybe our thoughts, our feelings, any ideas that you want to do it. So I'm looking here on my screen. I want to go Tech Lords, Tim, Lee, Ian, Guz Spiders, and then end with Bill. So Tech Lords, started off with us. Your main points or your thoughts and feelings of what we've been discussing right now.
Well, the most important thing for me is freedom of expression, and if I could have freedom of expression in a decentralized way, that would be the ideal world for me. So that's my closing comment.
Yes, that's very important. Now, Tim, build upon that.
Mine's going to be very simple. No more middlemen.
Yeah, no more middlemen. Lee.
I concur with you, Tim. No more middlemen. It's been great to hang out with you guys, Bill, Ian, Gov Spiders, Tim, Tech Lords. You guys are great. Satori B, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Ian.
Yeah, I was just thinking while we were talking, Tim, you were mentioning the currencies, and that we could, I think eventually we'll be able to trade currencies between our decentralized networks. And then I thought we could build a currency like Snapchat that you make an activity, you get the currency, and it disappears if you don't use it. But you could trade it to the farmer who's also using the network, and then he'll mail you food, and then maybe that'll refresh and he'll have it for 24 hours. But then there's always this sink that is constantly deflating it so it doesn't get out of hand.
That's actually a really great thought, because I know, for instance, the Mayan and Aztec culture used to use cocoa beads, cocoa beans as their currency, and the built-in within that cocoa beads that the longer you hold on to the resource, the less value it has. So there was a built-in incentive to spend it, to have it circulating, and I think that is a really important thing to go back to. Gov Spiders.
All right, I have a few points to cram in before we finish up here, but I can kind of compress it. As far as decentralization and opening up the web, is definitely going to be our mutable data, so like data that can be changed without a database or any sort of NoSQL infrastructure, that you'll still be able to get updates on whatever web page you're accessing, even though it's decentralized and distributed to several different people. The other thing is definitely your hosting incentive, which there's sort of farming on MadeSafe for that, but all these other services and all these other things really have to create incentive for hosting, for content creation, for interacting with the network in different ways. The other thing that I kind of got from whether it be this bounty program or Git or anything is coming together in a collaboration on, we even talk about this in kind of draws back to Ian was talking about different parties coming together and their power of their commenting, of their discussion, creating further reward. Coming up with systems that can reward multiple parties based on the size of their contribution. That's very, very hard to sit there and decide which changes are more important than others or which points are more important than others. The other thing about decentralization I was going to cover earlier and I wanted to grab at was there's this thing with scaling or the scope that you're looking at, that there are decentralized platforms within centralized platforms within decentralized platforms, and things are always going to kind of be like that. That we can look at a lot of centralization, or you'll see, MadeSafe is built on top of centralization of the internet currently. So even though that eventually could run into issues with, restrictions from ISPs or whatever you'd like to come up with, they still work within one another or coexist around each other. And then there was also a quote from Cory Doctorow, disclosing the true facts about systems that we rely upon should never be illegal. And I challenge you to be hardliners on these principles, to be called fanatics. If they're not calling you Puritans for these principles, you're not pushing hard enough. And I really think that's true. Like, I'm very on one side of the argument for a lot of these things, that, things need to be open, things can't be... Bill says, and I agree with that, we're never going to have a structure that is fully decentralized. You're always going to have scopes of centralization within that, and nodes that are centralized, and all types of... you can't have one without the other, essentially, because they're both different sides of the yin and yang on the internet. They're always going to be duking it out till the end. But I think it's really good, like Tim said. I've never been introduced to you before, but I'm Gov Spiders. Like you said that... sorry, I'm losing it now. Opening up this discussion bridges that gap so that, different people with different focuses in different regions of these technologies can come together and have discussions about how they really work and how they're practical, and even bringing up projects that can be implemented into different ways that someone that isn't into technology and programming can come up with these really vast philosophical ideas that inspire change in code. And I think that opening this up very often will help us a lot. This has probably been my favorite panel, and it's been awesome talking to all of you guys. Hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, definitely. And Bill, your thoughts? And do we lose Bill? Okay, but I guess I'll wrap it up too. I like what's going on. There's this progression, this evolution of what's going on, and yes, there's always this yin and yang. I like that too. But eventually, as we evolve, there's a merging process that has to happen, a merging of ideas and projects to keep things moving forward. And I like that analogy of how once we start merging and like those ant colonies, a swarm of ants could carry a huge amount of weight and can move mountains with the swarm, but they have to merge together and in this communication and networking. Bill, are you still there?
Yeah, I was definitely talking to myself on mute for a while.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming on. I really enjoyed this too. And I think we've done a good job of being comprehensive and talking about a lot of the different dimensions of this, and the philosophy is really important. I think the understanding that aspect of open source and decentralization is what is eventually going to be able to connect with most people. Because at the end of the day, most people, well, who knows way in the future how technical people will choose to become, but it's mostly the philosophy that is the only thing most people are going to be able to digest and understand. So I think this will be a really useful piece of media to help bridge those people into this conversation.
Yes, I think so too. And to open source, decentralizing, and merging of ideas. Thanks to everybody for coming on.